How will businesses fare under the Biden administration? An expert weighs in. This is the Issues Watch podcast. Hi, I'm Jeff Kazerman, Vice President of Government Relations at the New Jersey Society of CPAs, and welcome to episode 62. Today, we're going to talk about what we can expect from President-elect Joe Biden's first year. Wait a minute, maybe I should say President Biden. All depends on when you're listening to this podcast. As always, we'll be looking at this from both a policy and political perspective. As I always like to say, you need to know both to have any real insight into what's going on. Joining me today is New Jersey political analyst Ben Dworkin. Ben is the director of Rowan University's Institute for Public Policy and Citizenship. Ben is a dear old friend of mine, but please don't hold that against him. Welcome, Ben. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. I always appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys.
Let's get started by talking about President-elect Biden's policies and priorities. Many people, including myself, speculated that his top priority would be to address the coronavirus pandemic. And in fact, he just released his American Rescue Plan. It's a $1.9 trillion package that includes a wide variety of items. Ben, what are some of the notable elements of the plan?
There are three parts of this plan that we're looking at. The first is to deal with the virus itself, to try and create the infrastructure so that you can get 100 million doses of the vaccine out and distributed in the first 100 days. You then have a focus on helping people, just direct payments for people who are suffering right now. And so you would see the expanded benefits that would go to individuals directly, looking at potentially $1,400 per person, and expanding that pool, because one of the things that you have is adults with developmental disabilities who were living with parents and weren't eligible under previous stimulus plans. And the third part is really to bridge the transition between a relatively closed economy like we have right now, because people can't go out and can't do things, and helping folks move from that this closed economy to the more open economy, which we hope is going to happen over the next 3 to 6 months. So those are I think the essential elements that are part of it. But if I can add here, there are three big dynamics that I think we need to appreciate that are happening right now in this particular proposal from the incoming Biden administration. Number one, go big or go home. I mean, this is $1.9 trillion. This is a really big plan. But I think the experience from having been through the 2009 bailout of trying to resuscitate the economy during the Great Recession, something that Biden went through as vice president and that a lot of his senior economic team experience, is that they understand from their perspective, it is much better to spend more than to spend less. You get one shot to have a really big impact here, to have a impact, to make a difference that is going to affect enough of the economy and enough people directly. So that's why they're going big. This isn't, just, we're talking about a lot of money. $800 million is a lot of money. $900 billion is a lot of money. But going with this kind of number is significant. The second big dynamic that we're seeing play out here is an effort to take advantage of the moment. The nation is in crisis. Joe Biden believes that he won because of this, of the country's desire to have different kind of leadership in this crisis, facing the pandemic. And so this is why he's not waiting. He didn't propose this in his inaugural address. He's not waiting till his first address. That he's doing it a week before he gets inaugurated. Let's start talking about this. The effort is to try and move this forward now, because now is the best chance. Democrats have taken control nominally of Congress. It's the incoming administration. There's a desire to try and help them. So now's the time to move while the iron is hot, to use a cliche, but an appropriate one. And the third dynamic that we have going on here is that this is, the president proposes and Congress disposes. What that means is that this is just a proposal from the president. This isn't going to happen. And sometimes we get caught up because we've been, as Americans and as people involved in the economy, as citizens, we've been anxious to see something new happen. In fact, what we see here is a desire, sometimes an assumption that all of this is going to happen. And that's not clear at all. This is a $1.9 trillion proposal. And by the time they actually pass something, it could be a very different kind of proposal. What is clear from the Biden administration is that they are governing from the left of center out. It is not, it's not straight in the middle. These are Democrats. But they're trying to create a plan that they can pick off some Republicans. They hope to get all of their Democrats, which run everybody from a very conservative Joe Manchin, the U.S. Senator from West Virginia, to Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren on the far, very left side of the party spectrum, trying to get them all behind and to pick up a few more Republican votes. But the focus, where things might be adjusted, will be in the center more than on the left, I think. So those are three big dynamics I see going on with this proposal.
Interesting, Ben. You mentioned how some, or maybe a lot of Americans, just assume that he proposed it, so it's going to happen.
Right.
And I always say during elections, they while they're running for office, they throw out 1,000 things they say they're going to do, and I'm always like, there ain't no way that even if something happens, that it's going to look like what he said. Still has to get through Congress.
Mario Cuomo, the late Mario Cuomo, former governor of New York, is given credit for saying that we campaign in poetry, but we govern in prose.
Yep.
And that is the essence of what you just described.
So does the plan include aid to states and cities?
It does. And this is a significant Democratic priority, that there is going to be direct aid to cities and specifically to states. And states like New Jersey have suffered just a tremendous fall off from tax revenue, particularly sales tax revenue, because people aren't spending in the same way at the same levels as they might have been. So I think we will see that. That's something Democrats are going to propose and are not going to want to give up in order to move this plan forward.
So liability protection for businesses from coronavirus related lawsuits was a big point of contention between the House and Senate last year, and nothing ended up being included in either of the previous stimulus packages. So such protection is one of the top priorities of the business community. Does Biden's plan, his proposed plan, include any liability protection? I mean, I didn't see anything in the summary of his plan, but lots of times there are a lot of little things that you never see.
At least in my reading of the proposal, and again, it's a proposal, it's not a piece of legislation, it's a document, a summary. We have not seen liability protection yet. That doesn't mean it won't be included in the final version. Remember, they're governing from the center out. And so I think, to the degree that people who were more moderate, both on the Republican and certainly the Democratic side, are looking for some kind of liability protection, believing that it is important, they might hold their vote hostage until something along those lines gets there. And I think it's important to recognize, while understanding that liability protection as a concept is great, and a lot of people understand, if you did everything you were supposed to do, you shouldn't be sued. The problem was in the details, and that was a big hang up and a big stumbling point in previous negotiations when you had the Republicans in charge of the Senate. What I'm talking about is that the broadness of the legislative language that was being proposed under the heading liability protection also included protection from any kind of government enforcement, administrative enforcement, particularly when it comes to OSHA. Now, lots of companies, would rather have less government regulation. There's a sort of natural reaction to that, but it also got the Democrats, no, we're not ready to go there. And that's why they really stopped it, because they felt, hey, the government has to be able to come in and say you're doing things that are unsafe. What this mean, and not just be sued. So it was an expanded liability protection in terms of the details. What we may see as this gets negotiated in the coming few weeks was that a limited liability protection may well be brought up. And if it's needed in order to get votes, particularly moderate Democratic votes, then something small, it's not going to be the most expansive thing, but a first step towards liability protection may well be included. So even though it wasn't in the initial proposal, it doesn't mean it won't end up in the final version.
Right, right. I think it is gonna, regardless of whether or not it's in the proposal, I'm pretty sure it will be thrown on the table, if nothing else, by the Republicans. But of course, what happens with it, nobody knows. So, was there anything in Biden's plan, or let me reverse that? Was there anything not included in Biden's plan that you think should have been, or that you think he'll address later?
I think, look, the priority for the economy, the priority for the nation is to get the virus under control. And so the biggest thrust of this plan was to simply expand vaccinations and to move this up on a different way, in a coherent way, and to provide the funding to do it. The economy doesn't improve unless there are consumers, and the consumers can't do what they want, can't consume, they can't go out until this virus is under control. And so I think that was the biggest priority. The second thing that we're talking about in that transitional phase is helping schools. You've got to get the schools open, because parents are staying at home. They can't do anything because they've got to watch their kid during school hours. And this is affecting millions of people. So if you can get the schools open, and that requires real testing of all these kids all the time. It requires help with ventilation systems in some of these old school buildings. That kind of money was here. So I think the program contained a lot of what we expected it to contain, and even address some of the issues. I referenced the adults with disabilities who were living with even more elderly parents, who weren't part of the direct payment program. That was part of it. We saw $15 billion for grants to small businesses. We see $35 billion to help with financing for entrepreneurial businesses. Every crisis is an opportunity for somebody to come up with a new idea, a better way to do it. And I think the Biden administration was trying to address that. Were there things that were left out? Not in terms of the things that had to be focused on right now. What this plan generally includes is everything that they thought was most important to get the country through the next 3 to 6 months. Now, there
It's
will be other things going on. I mean, there will be
Right.
other parts of a Biden administration. But right now, when you've got 4,000 Americans dying a day, I mean, just 25% more than the number of people who died on 9/11 every day, then this is the priority. So there will be things down the road, but I think they included pretty much everything they felt was most important to deal with right now.
as you know, it's rare that anybody in Washington, including presidents, get everything that they're asking for.
Mhm.
Which of the items in his plan do you think are most likely to pass Congress, and which are most likely to be rejected?
It's hard to say. I mean, there's so much of it that it will be, I think it's difficult to say what is um, expendable and what is not, because different coalitions will form around different parts of it. Uh, there will be that coalition. I think, let me put it this way: the things that are going to stay um, are the things that directly deal with the expanded vaccination program. So, to the degree that the pharmaceutical industry in New Jersey is involved with developing new vaccines, manufacturing vaccines, distributing the vaccines, to the degree that our healthcare economy, not just pharmaceutical companies, but the entire healthcare infrastructure is involved with that, they should expect that they're going to be the priority. That is the most important thing. Where things might get compromised on, and it really depends on, again, the political coalition and the will to move fast, are going to be on things like the transitional assistance. How we get ourselves, how do we keep people going between the current economy and what we expect the economy to look like by June? um, that's where there could be some compromise. And in general, folks who, our the deficits in America exploded in the last 4 years. But yet suddenly, every time there's a new proposal, there are going to be a lot of people who are going to make hay and say, "Oh, we're spending too much." Um, Again, that's not the view of the Biden administration, and you've got a Democratic Senate and a Democratic House now. So I think there's going to be a willing, again, coalition. It's such an important word, to find the votes
Right.
to move forward uh, without those concerns. But if something's going to be compromised, it could be a little bit less. So you could see, hey, we're not going to give $15 billion to small businesses. We're going to give $10
Don't
billion.
say that.
But that's what we should understand. I mean, that's what we should we should, look at it as, okay, we're going to cut somewhere, and we don't want to cut on vaccines. That's the big thing. But you know what? These other things that are supposed to help companies, that are supposed to help. All right, $35 billion for low cost financing for businesses. That's nice. But what if we made it 15 billion? I mean, that's how it could still be there, just a smaller version of what. And that's where the debate comes. How much do you need in order to really make the difference for in the economy and in the life of the average citizen?
So, putting coronavirus related business issues to the side, are there any business related issues that you think will be top priority for Biden in 2021?
Yeah, look, I think first of all, in 2021, it's about getting the virus under control, getting the pandemic under control. That is a number, because everything else starts with that. You can't do all the other stuff if people can't interact and stand together. So healthcare infrastructure is going to be a priority. We have seen the disparate impacts on communities of color versus white communities, Anglo communities, and how that. So I think there's going to be a focus on expansion of the healthcare infrastructure in order to address as part of the pandemic response. But other business-related priorities that are coming down the road and that we should expect with the Biden administration are national transportation infrastructure. We always talked about there was going to be an infrastructure week over the last 4 years. I think now not only will you see that, but more importantly, the Biden administration wants to spend money on it. One of the criticisms of the Trump administration had been, well, they want to help us with infrastructure, but then they want the states to pay for it. The states don't have billions of dollars to pay for new airports and roads and tunnels. So transportation infrastructure is going to be a big business priority for the Biden administration. Green energy, expanding manufacturing in wind and solar, similar to what we're doing here in New Jersey, actually, with the wind power. These will be other priorities there. And I think as a general instinctive rule, we should expect the Biden administration to focus on small businesses, particularly small businesses that are owned by women and minorities. Those were going to be given special attention as the administration begins to staff the infrastructure of American government, of the national government. Those are going to be the places where you're going to see initiatives, press releases, priorities, new grants. That is the program that we're going to be talking about.
So do you think tax changes will be on his list of top priorities?
Sure. And I think it's clear. The corporate tax rates will go back up to the levels, are likely to go back up to levels we saw before they were cut dramatically a few years ago. Now, they might not go up exactly as far, but they're going to be raised because a lot of this costs money, and that's where you're going to see it. I wouldn't say that we'll necessarily see income tax increases for anybody beyond those who are making over 400,000. They're the top marginal rate. Top marginal rates might be expanded and go up again. So yes, taxes will go up, particularly for large corporations and wealthy individuals.
You think there will be higher or lower taxes on the what I call the middle class? Families that earn roughly 70,000 to, let's say, 110,000.
I think in terms of federal tax rates, we are not going to see an expansion of the tax bracket, of the tax rates for people in that 70 to 110,000 range, that middle class. First of all, the Biden campaign made such a big deal in the debates and on the campaign trail, saying that they would not going to raise taxes for people who make less than $400,000. I find it hard that in their first 6 months they would expand that. They're going to try and handle this in terms of managing the economy, managing income for the revenue for the federal government and expenditures for the federal government, dealing really with very high end, over $400,000 in income, or high end corporate tax rates. That's where they're going to focus, and probably not here. I think they won't go back on that promise very quickly, really in the first 2 years. And then we'll have to see how things are, obviously.
Right. Salt cap, which obviously is very important to most people in New Jersey, including myself. Any thoughts on what's going to happen with that?
I think we will see. Look, the Northeast was strengthened. This is what happened. Northeast, which is generally voted very Democratic, has more clout because Democrats have better control of the agenda. So I think that the elimination of the cap on the SALT, the state and local tax deduction from your federal income taxes, is going to be a priority for them. It
Well,
might
that's
not
good.
happen. It might happen in year two. That's a thing. I don't know whether it's necessarily going to be something they get done in 2021. But in 2022, I think it will certainly be raised and debated. And I think it's much more likely that it will happen. If you're the Biden administration and you want to help your folks who are struggling, particularly in the Northeast, where we have high property tax rates because of the demand on land and the condensed nature of how we live our lives, really here, especially here in New Jersey. The easiest way to give people that tax cut is to eliminate this cap.
Right.
And so I think it's an easy way to get a little bit of a political win. It might get thrown in. It's just not, I don't know if it's necessarily in the top 5 things that they want to
Right.
do in terms of taxes. So it might take a little bit of time before that issue gets raised, but it's going to get raised because the Northeast is such a big part of the Democratic and Biden coalition.
I certainly hope that, well, I and probably millions of New Jerseyans certainly hope that they get rid of that cap. So now let's take a look at some of the political dynamics of
Mhm.
what might happen during the Biden administration's first year. From the perspective of congressional Democrats, not Republicans, but Democrats, do you think Biden will be liberal, moderate, or conservative in his approach to business?
I think Joe Biden, from the Democratic perspective, is going to be very moderate. And no one expected anything different. I mean, Joe Biden is such a known quantity. And in effect, is really the first creature of Washington in a while to become president, right? We keep electing these outsiders or people who used to be governor. Here is a real creature of Washington, someone who's been there, and I think he's going to govern uh, from the center. That's the people he has surrounded himself with have been of that ilk. They're very experienced veterans of Washington and generally centrist in the scheme of how politics is arranged is laid out for us right now. So I think they'll look at him as a moderate in the way that he's generally been considered a left of center moderate for the last 40 years.
So I assume in his appointment of folks to high level economic posts that that's what he's been doing.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, I think what we've seen, there haven't been a lot of complaints from the traditional conservative financial sector, from big businesses. Most importantly, what the Biden administration represents to the business community is stability. And it's just going to calm everything down. If you were running a major corporation, a multi-international corporation, if you had major, factories and offices around the world or around the country or even around the state, you were worried over the last few years about where the president might go tomorrow. What's going to be the new priority? Who's going to be attacked because you said something or didn't say something or did something he liked or didn't do something? You, these are all concerns that I think we're now going to see go away. So, most importantly, the Biden administration and their economic team wanted to project that kind of stability. You know these people, you know who Janet Yellen is, you've experienced her, you have relationships with her. So now you know, look, I can work with these folks. The pharmaceutical industry, as a good example, it's going to be different than it was under the Trump administration. But in fact, it may well be better. And what we saw, actually, something that's come out recently, is that an analysis of campaign giving showed that generally big pharma overwhelmingly supported Democrats and Joe Biden versus Trump and the Republicans. I think in part because any kind of expansion of insurance coverage by, for example, expanding the Affordable Care Act, the ACA, Obamacare, is going to help people be able to buy the pharmaceuticals that are being developed and produced by these companies. But more importantly, it's just going to be calmer. We're going to be able to talk to people. We have relationships with these people. We have a seat at the table. These are, the important things for the business community as it moves forward.
Right. Yeah, actually, I always hear business owners, the business community talking about, like you said, one of the top priorities is just stability so that they can plan. Let's wrap it up with a few questions impacting New Jersey. So we already talked about the SALT cap, but there were a couple of other issues I'd like to get your take on. We talked about infrastructure funding before. Do you think New Jersey will finally get the gateway funding that it needs?
Yes. I think there are three big areas in which the federal government, the Biden administration, in the next year and a half, 12 to 18 months, is going to start moving to help this state. So we've talked about a couple. One, the elimination of the cap on the SALT deduction. A second is going to be part of what was part of this proposal, the $1.9 trillion proposal. That's direct aid to states. New Jersey had to go out and borrow $4 billion to keep things going. People want to be able to pay that back quickly rather than have that as a debt that is hanging on. So direct funding to states will help. And as you mentioned, the Gateway Tunnel project. This will probably be when it finally gets started with shovels in the ground, the largest public infrastructure project in the nation. And it's going to take us 8 to 10 years to complete. Now, we were on the verge of starting it back in 2009. Chris Christie came in and said he didn't like it, and there was no compromise to try and make it better. So rather than celebrating the opening of a tunnel today in 2020 or 2021, we're stuck starting a new version of it. But I think if anybody's going to understand the need for rail infrastructure, it's going to be a guy like Joe Biden, who has taken Amtrak as his commute every day for all the years that he worked as a senator in Washington, D.C. I think Pete Buttigieg, the former mayor of South Bend, Indiana, who is the designated Secretary of Transportation, has a good relationship with New Jersey and will understand the need for this. So much of the American economy, this is not just about New Jersey and New York replacing 100-year-old tunnels that flood every time there's a major storm and have to be shut down, which is why we have all these delays, people trying to get in and out of New York. But the entire country, commerce just moves through this corridor, and you have to, for the sake of the country's economy, make sure you've got the right kind of infrastructure. So yes, the Gateway Tunnel, I think, is going to be a big priority in terms of the public infrastructure for the Biden administration, but we'll also see the SALT cap elimination and direct aid to the states. Those are the three areas in which New Jersey, I think, is going to really benefit from the priorities of the Biden administration.
Well, I certainly hope they finally get Gateway going. Getting in and out of New York is such a horrible experience that I just won't go most of the time. Are there any major industries in New Jersey that you think will benefit under the Biden administration or perhaps be hurt? Now, I know pharmaceuticals, it'll be a positive thing, like you said, but a couple other maybe industries that'll be hit hard or probably benefit.
Well, in terms of those who are going to be hit hard, I think again, the multinational companies are going to face higher tax rates, but they know it's coming. And so I think they've started to prepare. I mean, any good CEO and CFO is preparing now for these higher tax rates. Understand that the break they got in the Trump administration is not going to be the same as what they'll get under the Biden administration. But again, they will benefit from getting the pandemic under control, and so consumer spending is going to go up. I mean, all those things, investing in transportation infrastructure, these are going to be benefits to those companies, even as they might have to pay more. But more specifically, we've talked about it, manufacturing and construction. So manufacturing, to the degree that we have industries here that are involved with producing wind turbines, producing the engines, producing the cables that carry that kind of energy, producing solar panels. These are the kinds of things, building out the delivery of solar panels. Those kinds of industries in green energy are going to see, I think, a benefit over the next few years. Construction, heavy construction, everything, the people who were involved with the Laborers International Union, pouring concrete, those kinds of industries are going to be expanded. The other one, I think, where New Jersey, an industry in New Jersey that's pivotal to us that will, I think, benefit is our tourism. It's $30-40 billion of an industry in New Jersey. People want to be able to go back to the shore and to be on the beach without a mask. They want to be able to spend, they want to take their families on vacation. So tourism, hospitality, restaurants, the dining industry, all of these places can see a much different economic outlook in 6 months than they do right now. And therefore, that is going to be a big benefit. I am of the view that there is pent up commercial desire among the consumers in this state and around the country. And the closer we get, the quicker we can get to getting the pandemic under control. That consumer desire, consumer spending will be unleashed. And so, in particularly in tourism, people want to get out of their houses. So they're going to want to go somewhere, and that can be a real boom for the Jersey Shore and other tourism-related places that we have here in the state.
I don't know how much more consumer spending I'm going to be doing because I've just about broken the piggy bank on Amazon gifts to myself. But anyway, that about wraps it up. And thank you so much for joining us today, Ben.
Jeff, I always appreciate the opportunity to talk to the New Jersey CPAs. You guys do amazing stuff, and I appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation.